This PDF is part of Module 11. This is Chapter 11 from our book. I've added some videos and some comments. This chapter is about information systems management. I have another PDF that I created about vendor management, specifically how to manage a vendor in the IT world, how the IT management staff leadership manages their vendors, which is important to manage vendors. Otherwise, you really don't get the deliveries that you anticipated. That said, let's begin. We'll look at the functions of an IT organization. They vary quite a lot, obviously, depending on the nature of the company and its needs. And we'll look at some of the advantages and disadvantages of outsourcing, which is a critical function that needs to be incorporated within IT. This is a fairly common organizational structure for IT. So the Chief Information Officer works for either the Chief Operating Officer or the Chief Executive Officer. It could be, depending on the size of the company, depending on the needs and the function, what the CEO's role is like, what the COO's role is like, it'll vary. There's sometimes a Chief Security Officer here. In a large company, a Chief Security Officer would not work for the CIO. You want to have some separation so there isn't, so if something goes wrong, if this Chief Security Officer works for the CIO, if something went wrong, they could sort of bury it. So it's nice to have some independence in a large company. Very large companies, medium-sized and large and medium-sized companies tend to have the security work for the CIO. But in very large companies where you have multiple divisions and subsidiaries, you will see a separate chief security officer. So under the CIO, you have different roles. Obviously, I added a couple of roles here: planning, short-term and long-term. You know, it can be done by the CIO. It can be done in tandem with the CTO, the Chief Technology Officer. It's sort of the right-hand person of the CIO. Pretty high-level person, usually a CTO. Sometimes there is no CIO. Sometimes it's just the CTO in smaller organizations. But a larger organization will have a Chief Information Officer and have a CTO. And you'll have some planning for short-term and long-term, a function that has to be done internal to IT as well as with the business. You know, you have to have some sort of coordination between the business and IT, obviously, particularly for long-term planning. Then you have operations, running the data center, running the cloud, developments, coding, network development, mostly software development, coding, outsourcing relations, maintaining your outsources. We'll talk more about outsourcing and the pros and cons and the things you have to be concerned about with outsourcing in a couple of slides going forward. And then a Chief Information Security Officer, a CISO. And the Chief Information Security Officer works for the CIO, and they're obviously responsible for security. Many companies will have a CISO working for the CIO, and there's no Chief Security Officer. That's really sort of for a very large company. And then I added here IT testing and QA, user QA. So you'll have IT doing their testing. They'll do the development, right? And we've talked about this, I think, earlier in the semester. There's a development environment, a set of systems where you do your development, your coding, separate from everything else. Then you do your IT testing in a separate physical environment of systems. And then, or if it's not physical, it usually is physical. It could be virtual, but it is separate so that you don't have developers breaking things that are being tested or things that are in production. And then after IT finishes with that testing, there's the user quality assurance, and the users look at what's happened. The users sign off or reject, ask for different changes or different functionality. They may realize things that they hadn't realized earlier on. Excuse me. So the business partners will have their review as well in a separate environment, because testing, there could be something that overlaps and interferes with the business partners while they do their quality assurance testing. It's sort of like testing, but they're really QAing it, looking at the quality of it. And sometimes they'll realize they need a function or they need a different drop down or changes to a drop down when they go through that quality assurance review. So you can't always predict everything. No business partner, is going to predict all of the needs up front. They'll have other thoughts as they go through the QA review, and they may go back to development, go back to IT testing, back to user testing, and then ultimately go into operations, into production over here. And that's kind of the lay of the land. Again, there's a lot of variation in terms of different companies and how they structure their IT, but this is fairly standard, and I think this gives you a good sense of how it works. I hope. If you have any questions, we'll talk about it. There are many roles in IT. So you have a business analyst in IT. You could have a business analyst working in the business as well. and you'll have something which I guess the book doesn't speak to called a SME, subject matter expert. SME. You'll hear that term SME, and that's a subject matter expert is really not somebody. It's not somebody in IT. It's somebody in the business who's expert at the business, an expert at the function, and the SME will work with the IT business analyst. There could be a business analyst who's a SME or not a SME in the business as well. So there's that function where they're looking at functionality, they're trying to define the needs, they're trying to understand what has to happen to have a system that meets the current and future needs of the business in that department. And then you have systems analysts that are a little bit more detailed in terms of designing the database. They may be creating a new database. And you remember we talked about relational data diagramming with the crow's feet. They'll look at a database, they'll look at what the systems will be like, how they'll be backed up, what they'll have to interface to. And then you have the programming, and they'll obviously do some of the design work. And then the programmer will start coding things, also be involved in design. There's a little overlap here in terms of design. And then you have a testing and QA engineer in IT. You'll have somebody who's doing, their function is testing, or their function is to work with the users to do QA. And they're professionals who just do that. They don't do programming, they don't do design, but they work on testing and quality assurance of an application after it's coded. So technical writers, let's talk about that. If you're coding for a bank, if you have an IT department that's working on systems for a bank or an insurance company or a factory or a healthcare organization, you probably won't have technical writers. You'll have the programmers writing any technical documentation so that they understand, the future workers in IT will know how things are put together. But if you're selling software, if you're a Microsoft or a company that's selling software, or IBM, you need technical writers, because now you're not only documenting for IT purposes for the programmers, but you need to document for your customers. And when someone calls the help desk, someone needs to have technical documentation. So a technical writer will be available in a very large company, and will be absolutely necessary in a company that's selling software. Most companies don't have technical writers. The programmers do their own technical documentation. Then you have tech support engineers. You have the help desk, various levels of help, support 1, support 2, support 3, depending on the problem, getting involved to help users solve their problems. You'll have a similar parallel organization in what's called a SOC, Security Operations Center, of support people to handle security problems, specifically and only security issues. So you have a sort of a separate parallel organization for security, in addition to the help desk. And then, of course, you have network administrators and network engineers to be involved with the network. And, of course, for the last 10 years or so, you've had systems and networks in the cloud that you're connecting to. So you have to have specialists who know whether it's Amazon Web Services, AWS, or Microsoft Azure. That's become a little bit more complex because the network and the systems are now they're not only on premises in a data center or data centers that you own, but they're in the cloud as well with vendors. So it causes a bit more complexity, but there are people obviously who have to be trained to understand how to do that. And then there are a number of different consultants that come in for programming, for design, for training, for lots of things, for help implementations, to help travel. If I had to install a new system that was scattered throughout the country in 15 states, and I needed a company to help do the implementation because I couldn't have my programmers traveling or my support people traveling that much. So there are a number of reasons why you have consultants, for IT. An often overlooked and sometimes misunderstood function is technical sales and technical support sales. So these are the folks who work with the salespeople. So you may have salespeople who are heads down, sales folks, sales team, and they may know the products, but they may not know them that well. But you might have people, not so much from the programming area, but staff that have worked in implementation with customers. So they're used to dealing with customers, they're used to dealing with the outside world, they have good communication skills, and they have some good technical skills because they understand implementations, and they may help a salesperson. A salesperson may get to a point where a customer is really interested, but they have a lot of questions. You don't need a programmer for that, and you don't want to have programmers on the road necessarily talking to sales folks. So you have these people, this team of sales support, technical sales support that could travel, that can help the sales team to backfill when the questions get a little bit more complicated and technical. And there's a lot, large companies, again, this is more for companies that are selling software, less likely for companies that are just where IT is servicing their own company, their own internal employees. Project managers handle projects. The reason you need a project manager in IT is often you'll have not just IT, but one or more other business groups working together, each having different responsibilities. There are these things called these RACI charts. I'm not sure if you've ever heard of RACI charts that lay out the responsibilities for each department. But somebody has to meet with the various groups. It may be multiple groups in IT. It might be multiple different departments in the business. And someone's got to coordinate all that, make sure that if something is in a critical path that's not being done either by IT or by the business partner, that's followed up on and gets accomplished. Otherwise, subsequent tasks can't be completed. So very important to have project managers. Managers in IT obviously manage the department itself, manage programs usually, and there are managers who work for directors, who work for VPs, who work for senior VPs, etc. But there's obviously, like in any organization, whether it's HR or IT, in any organization you'll have, various levels of management. And database administrators work on databases, tuning them, making sure they're safe, making sure they're backed up, making sure they're working efficiently and effectively, making sure it's the right kind of database for the application. We talked earlier about how relational databases are not good for very large data lakes, large vast amounts of data. You'll have a non-relational database, so they'll help with making those decisions and engineering and designing the database that's appropriate for the application and the needs of the business, and also for reporting. Working on the databases for the cubes and the data marts and the enterprise data warehouse. All those various different kinds of databases. They have to be designed, built, maintained, made decisions about, and tuned, and making sure that there's enough memory on the hardware side of it, and looking at all the different aspects holistically of how a system works and how the database supports that application. Well, we had a whole module on business intelligence analysts, right? So these are the BI folks, and they'll be both in the business and in IT, depending on how technical it is. But more and more, you'll have the departments doing a lot of the reporting. Once the platform, the product, whether it's, I don't know if you guys recall Microsoft Power BI or Tableau, the most common business intelligence tools that are out there. There are many others, but those are the most common ones you'll see. So on the business side, they'll be more involved with pulling the reports, creating reports, less involved in the data mart creations. The data marts will be built by IT, working with the business analysts in the business. So they'll work together. There'll be some overlap, but the more technical work, obviously, in terms of building data marts, will be on the IT side. The data cubes, that there'll be multiple data cubes per data mart. And if you recall, a data mart is a subset of the enterprise data warehouse. It's subject driven. It's for finance or marketing or HR or whoever the inventory or purchasing, whatever the need is, there'll be a subset of the data warehouse built into a data mart. And then the data mart will be built by IT, but data cubes that work directly with the reports, whether it's Microsoft Power BI or Tableau, that part of it will most likely be done by the business. And then we have a chief technology officer. We talked about that person earlier, really sort of a right-hand person to the CIO. The chief information officer is the person responsible for everything in IT, operations, development, security, networking, all the pieces that have to work together. The CIO is responsible for all those functions. And the CTO, if there is a CTO, again, is somebody who works closely with the CIO to sort of support when the CIO can't get to the meeting or is traveling or has some function that keeps them from helping. This is sort of like, actually, if you want to think about it, it's sort of like this chief executive officer and the chief operating officer. It's kind of now that I think about it, it kind of complements how you have that for the company. The chief executive officer might be involved in different functions or traveling, so the day-to-day operations might be handled more by the CTO in this case. So it's parallel to CEO, chief executive officer, and chief operating officer. Sort of a similar relationship here. And then we have the CISO, the chief information security officer, who would work, for the CIO. And in some cases, there may be a chief information security officer who is at a corporate level that works for the COO of the company. But that's fairly rare unless it's really a very large company with multiple subsidiaries and lots of divisions, where you'll have that. As you saw earlier in that slide, the second slide of this presentation, we distinguish between those roles of the CIO and the CISO. Large companies will have a succession plan, and this is not really just for IT. This is really I put a note here for all departments. This is not specific to IT. It's probably very important for IT, but it's really important for every department. What a succession plan is, you're running a large department. When I had when I was the CIO for Anthem, I had 600-700 employees, a couple of hundred different consultants at any one time, and it's a big department, lots of vice presidents and directors. What happens if I quit, or what happens if I get ill? Who's going to replace me, or change jobs? So you always, they may not be something that's publicly talked about because it makes people nervous, and then who gets picked, and there may be some competition about who's going to succeed the CIO, or the Chief Information Security Officer, or the Vice President of Development, or the Vice President of Operations. But you need a plan so that, or if the company's rated and a number of high-level players leave at the same time, that could affect the way a company operates. It could affect the value of the stock, in fact. So you need some way to sort of always have a plan with HR that says, if this vice president leaves, these are 1 or 2 people that could potentially fill that role, maybe permanently, maybe as an interim, until there's a recruitment process, which could take 6 months to replace that person, but you have to do something in the interim. And again, the biggest problem is when multiple executives or senior leaders leave at the same time for whatever reasons. So you need a succession plan. It's not specific to IT. It's a corporate-wide initiative. It should be, at any rate, for larger companies. Okay, let's talk about outsourcing. There's a chart. We'll go into this a little bit more detail later, a couple of slides going forward. Save cost, gain expertise. Your backroom, your work, is Peter Drucker is a well-known consultant, and his quote is, your backroom is someone else's front room. So if you outsource some function, for the company that's doing the outsourcing, to them, that's their main business, right? For you, it's your back room. But for the consulting company, that's their core business is doing consulting. And let's go through another slide that will go through this in a little bit more detail in terms of pros and cons, because there's definitely pros and there's definitely cons to it, to outsourcing. But you have to have it, in my opinion. You have to have some outsourcing. You'll see why. There's some real, very important reasons why you'd want some outsourcing. So this slide speaks to some of the advantages. Obtain expertise. You could quickly bring in people who may know an operating system you don't know, and you're bringing in to your IT enterprise an operating system no one knows. So you bring a consultant to help, or certain programming language, or maybe some additional project managers that you may not have on staff. Cost reduction, most likely. International is not as inexpensive as it was in like India and other countries offshore. But there are Eastern Bloc countries as well have a lot of outsourcing companies, and they're not as inexpensive. You probably will find that you would want to start off with less complicated projects so they can learn your business, learn how your systems work, and not give them something very complicated and a very large project that's complex to an outsourcer. You want the outsourcer to have some time to learn, to gain expertise about you. You want to bring them in for their expertise, but you want them to sort of gain some expertise from you. So they may have economies of scale. They may have a very large company that could offer some discounted pricing per hour. So there's usually a cost reduction, not as much as people would think ordinarily. A risk reduction. Capital financial exposure. You will certainly have some reduction in what your own exposure is in terms of costs, because you have a cost that's more controllable. You could turn it down or turn it up. Improve quality, maybe. Reduce implementation risk. I think that's a big one. I put a little note here. You need an outsourced partner or two. You need a couple of them to quickly flex staffing up when needed. So, for example, when they talk about implementation risk, what they mean is, I have a chief executive officer who says, I have to have this new function done in 6 months. Or there's a new federal regulation, which happens every year, and we have to have this done by the end of the year and tested and completed for January 1. Now, you may need 15, 20, 30, 40, 50 people. It may take you months to hire and train those people. Just finding and hiring them would take months and orienting them. But if you have a partner, particularly a partner that is accustomed to working with you, and I say partner, they're not really outsourcers. You want more than an outsourcing company that's just like a stranger to you. You want to have a couple of outsourcing companies that become partners. Know your organization, know your people, know your systems, gain some expertise about you that you could ask them to bring in people for needs, whether it's a federal requirement or some competitive requirement that the chief executive officer wants done. You can't hire the people fast enough. But these outsourcers have people that they're paid more, and they work part of the year. They work on and off depending on the needs, and they'll have people that could pull in for you and get them online quickly. And so you need a couple of good partners, really, outsourcing companies that are partners, so you're not stuck. The last thing you can do as a chief information officer is tell the CEO, it'll take me 6 months just to hire those people. You can't, that's not going to work. You're not going to be a CIO very long. You have to have partners you can work with to scale up. You know, hospitals do the same thing. They have per diem nurses, right? Their census is high. They've got a lot of admissions, patients filling all the beds, and they bring per diem nurses in, you know, just for the day, pay day by day for how many days they need them. You need to do the same thing in IT. It's very important. The big disadvantage is not so much loss of control, but loss of expertise. So I put a note here. You need to keep your internal staff involved and to not lose essential knowledge. So you can't take a large project. You're not going to outsource a small project. You're going to outsource a large project, but you have to have some of your IT folks involved working in tandem with the outsourcers. So you know what the outsourcers are doing. You know who's good, you know who's not working so well. You understand the outsourcing's quality. You understand how quickly they can turn things around. And most importantly, they're not losing knowledge about whatever the new product is that they're developing. The new code, the new interface, whatever they're developing, they need to understand it. Your internal team needs to understand it. So you're not going to lose control if you maintain that connection and ensure that your internal staff, there's some of them involved with the team, that's the outsourcing team that's doing the coding. It's really very important. Let's see. No easy exit. Well, again, you can mitigate that. And you mitigate that by this blue box, making sure your team is involved. So if you can exit, if you're not happy with that outsourcer and you want to choose a different outsourcer, or you're at a point where you want to gradually hire people and bring this expertise in-house and not use an outsourcer for a particular function, if you have your staff involved, you can exit. You can exit completely. You can exit and move the work or the project to a different outsourcing company, but you have to have that connection. You can't just blindly give work to an outsourcer and hope that the manager there is working with your manager and that's enough. That's not enough. You have to have some of your technical team involved with their programming technical team or design team to ensure that they're not losing knowledge of what's being created for your company. So that's a very important way to mitigate the issue of loss of control and not having an exit plan or an exit strategy for leaving the outsourcer. Let's see, benefits outweighed by long-term costs. In time, outsourced vendor is de facto a sole source. No, again, you want more than one. You want at least two good partners, two good outsourcing companies that are they're not commodities. This is not a commodity programmer that you just grab off the street, people off the street. You know, an outsourcing company they pull them in from Indeed or some, Dice or some recruiting website. You want a partner that's got some permanent staff. They're certainly going to have staff that they pull in and out that don't work full-time for the company. They're going to have that. But you want a partner, not just an outsourcing commodity. All right, let's switch gears now. We've talked about outsourcing. Let's switch gears to employees. This slide speaks to you have a right to various things. And the most important thing is effective training. And I'll tell you why that's important for the company and for your career as well in IT. And even in the business, on the business side of the house where you're working with IT. I put a box here. You really don't have rights. The employer has responsibilities that benefit everyone. They've got responsibilities to give you the right hardware and programs, a reliable network, a secure computing environment, protection, etc. But these aren't your rights. You don't have rights to these. But these are responsibilities the employer has. I just take umbrage with the word rights. You have no rights. Now, these are responsibilities the employer wants to fulfill because it's satisfactory and beneficial to them and to you holistically for the organization. And effective training is very important for the company and for you. If you're in a company and you're not getting trained, or even if it's informal training and you're learning things new and it's not formal training, that's fine. It could be informal training that you learn on the job, but you have to be growing in IT. You have to be learning. Just like any other company, any other department. If you're not learning and growing in any function, you're doing a disservice to your career. It's more important in IT because technology changes so quickly. So you have to be able to stay current. And if your company's not doing that, it's a disservice to you in your IT career, and it's a disservice to the company, because the people who are working there in IT are not effective and not as efficient in terms of how they work. Now you have responsibilities, right? You're being paid, so be proactive, check your work, make sure it's accurate, help others when you can. It helps your brand. So you're going to have responsibilities, obviously, and there's a whole bunch of bullets here. Really, most of it's going to depend on what the policies and procedures are within that company, and it's going to be your responsibility, however you're protecting your password or changing it, however you're maintaining the security of your mobile devices, that you're not installing unauthorized programs. There'll be a number of IT policies and procedures that in IT and the business, right? The business uses the systems, the business uses laptops and phones, and not so much phones today, but laptops and maybe iPads that are issued to employees. So you're going to have to follow all of the policies and procedures, and it's going to vary from time to time, from company to company. It'll change, even within a company. But my biggest advice for your responsibility is be proactive. Be proactive. Look to see how you can improve things. Look to see how you can help someone else. As we get closer to the final of this class, we're going to have a project. And that project is going to give you exercise in how to improve a system process, right? We talked about draw.io. I'm going to give you a draw.io with some problems in the system process. I'm going to give you a Word document that spells out exactly what's happening, so it's clear, so you understand the draw.io, and you're going to improve it. You're going to answer some questions in the Word document, and you're going to improve it. It'll be fine. We'll get you to that spot. And you're going to leave this class with some good tools, so that you can be proactive and you can help an organization become more efficient, more effective, and also help others when you can. It helps your brand. If you're someone who keeps trade secrets or things you've learned to yourself, people realize it. But if you're helping others proactively and willingly, you're much more appreciated in the company. And when you leave and go somewhere else, and after you're hired, they may call back and say, "Oh, we just hired so and so." And people talk, especially in a sort of a limited geography like Long Island, or really any metropolitan area. If you stay within HR or finance or IT, over the years, people get to learn who's who in that ecosystem. And if you have a good brand of being a helpful person who's proactive and tries to learn new things and exercises their gray matter and their human capital to improve the situation for themselves or for the company, that brand will precede you when you go for an interview and we go to your next company. Oh, by the way, here, avoid reporting trivial problems. Try to avoid all problem reporting. What I mean by that is, if you have a problem, try to solve it yourself. Don't give it to your boss right away. Make an honest effort to solve whatever the problem is yourself. And if you can't because there's interdepartmental friction or problems, then bring that to your boss. Or if some other problem, if it's technical and you can't solve it, well, explain the things you did to try to solve it. So don't quickly give problems to your boss, because your boss will be overwhelmed if he or she has too many workers like that. So try to solve problems on your own. And that goes back to sort of being proactive. This slide speaks to hardware infrastructure moving to the cloud, so the operational boundaries are fuzzy. I wouldn't call it fuzzy, but I'd say it's more complicated, right? You've got an infrastructure on premises, maybe in more than one location, most likely in several locations, a data center or two, and then also, networking to the cloud, whether it's, IBM or Microsoft Azure or AWS by Amazon. It's more complicated, basically. So it says workers shift from traditional employees to consultants. That's somewhat true. There are more and more people who work as consultants in IT, and fewer of them work as full-time staff. But some of these consultants, I've had them myself, where I've had consultants that we brought in as consultants, and they worked as consultants for us for years, like their employees. So the boundaries can be a little bit more complicated because of the cloud, but things will get more complicated as we roll out artificial intelligence. I put a comment in here about synthetic workers, virtual co-workers. You've seen some videos and some presentations on IPsec and Amelia, how that can talk to Alexa. And it's, oh no, excuse me, no, Alexa, stop. My own device here was about to chime in. She lit up right away. IPsoft, let me shut the microphone on that. So IPsoft, I've done a lot of work for them, an international AI firm that's here in Manhattan. They have Amelia. You saw the phone call where Alexa talked to Amelia and was able to find the personal time off for a particular employee. But you know, these are lots of synthetic and virtual coworkers. That will only become accelerated as you see now in 2023. We've got ChatGPT, Bing AI, and Bard, Google.com. I've tried all three of these now. Right now, of course, this is anecdotal, but I kind of like Bard, although I hate to give more business to Google, but I kind of like Bard, Google, better than ChatGPT, and maybe better than Bing. But again, I haven't spent hours and hours and hours on it, but just putting in putting in the same query into all three systems, it seems like Bard's a little bit more detailed, but that's just me. But the world's going to change. We all know that. We know there's obviously, I get emails from students. I get questions in class about what does this mean to us in the future. I mean, I think there'll be more good than bad. Let me put it that way. There will be changes in jobs. There will be jobs that are eliminated. You know, when automation took place, you know, and robotics, lots of blue collar jobs were lost, and blue collar jobs, unfortunately, many went to China, which hopefully we're making an effort to pull some of that back or move it to India or South America, and hopefully more of it to the United States. But the blue collars took their hit. White collars will go through an adjustment. There's no question. But there'll be lots of jobs to work in association with AI, artificial intelligence, supporting AI, not necessarily coding it, not necessarily programming it or doing the math and the probability calculations, you know, but just supporting it, supporting the databases, understanding where can you get data. Data is like food to artificial intelligence. The more data, the better. The richer the data, the richer the AI, the richer the food. So you really have to look at the data input is critical to what the AI output is going to be. And there's, you know, there's AI learns on its own, machine learning, artificial intelligence. There's this whole, I think Jake brought this up in class first about NEAT, the neuro evolutionary algorithmic topology. Let's call it NEAT, okay? Basically, NEAT is this process in which AI machines can improve on their own and evolve, and the neural networks sort of compete the way biological organizations compete in the world, and these neural networks compete, and the more successful ones get to procreate and spawn off other neural networks based on they actually call it the DNA of other. They take two very successful neural networks and take their DNA, their characteristics of the neural network, and put that into the new neural network, so that the neural network have the advantages of both and have some random factor put in there as well, just the way biology has random genetic mutations that sometimes prove to be very beneficial. So it's going to be a different world. There's no question about it, but I think there'll be more good than bad. There'll be lots of great AI for healthcare. There'll be enormous benefits for people's health, I think, for chemistry, for invention and innovation. AI could help quantum computers. Quantum computers can help AI. I think overall, I think we'll all be in a better place. It'll just be change. Sit tight, take advantage of it, learn AI, learn how to use it, and do all the things we said earlier. Be proactive, always be learning. You'll be fine. I wouldn't worry too much about it because there's no great specific answer. Nobody knows the answer, okay? But I do think the advantages will greatly outweigh the disadvantages. So watching the watchers, who watches IT, right? IT's got lots of access to files, to logs, to know what's going on, to, you know, potentially create a problem for a company, could steal information, could damage things. You know, they could potentially tamper with logs to cover their tracks. So obviously people in IT have to have a certain amount of ethics, and, you know, they could also go to jail if they're doing something that's really illegal or damaging. And I haven't seen people go to jail, but I have seen people get fired because they were using corporate machines and systems to support their personal business, which is also unethical. But you also have to have external monitoring, right? You have to have audits. You have to internally audit. Lots of companies have their own internal audit department. I had my own internal IT audit department. I had a small group of people who did audits for me internal to IT, so I wouldn't have to wait for the corporate auditors to come in or external auditors. You know, the big four accounting firms like, you know, Deloitte and Accenture and those large PwC and those large, Price Waterhouse, these companies that come in to audit IT and the finances every year, you want to have all your ducks in a row long before the annual audit. So companies will have their own internal auditors to check on things, as well as IT, if they have the luxury. And I had a big enough department where I had several people helping audit. And what do we audit? We make sure, for example, default passwords are changed when a new router or a firewall comes in, it gets installed. Do they really change the default password to something else? Are backups being done properly? Are updates to the firewalls and antivirus and other malware detection systems, are they being updated properly? So there are a lot of things you can do to ensure that you're not surprised that there isn't something accidentally going wrong, or in a nefarious way, somebody tampering with logs and trying to put some programs in production that steal money, whether it's 10 cents from every account or whatever it might be, or stealing information or stealing your programs and your intellectual property. You have to have internal audits and you have to have external auditors as well to keep everyone honest. Of course, this slide speaks to robotics, how McDonald's is looking to more and more replace physical workers with physical robots. Of course, we've got the same challenge now with AI. BuzzFeed is a fairly well-known media company, news media. I guess about a month ago, they laid off 10% of their journalistic staff, the low-end sort of copywriters, journalists, whatever you want to call them, not really investigative journalists, but people who are posting news articles manually on BuzzFeed and maybe putting some puzzles up and things like that. They replaced 10% of their staff at BuzzFeed with ChatGPT. So whether it's robotic workers replacing human workers, or artificial intelligence, or robotic process automation, sort of less complicated, right? But we're going to learn more and more about RPA, robotic process automation, that eliminates a lot of human white-collar work. And as AI comes to bear on organizations, it'll be able to replace higher level mental activity. So it's an evolution, and there's no turning the clock back, I don't think. But I think in the long run we'll all be better off. Here's just another slide about robotics. Foxconn is a supplier for Apple in China. In 2016, this is a while ago now, they replaced 60,000 factory workers with robots. So that might, this automation could level the playing field as far as, we've lost so many jobs to low labor costs in China. Well, if we all have robots, they're all cost about the same, and it may equalize the playing field, and there may be no advantage to having large factories in China or offshore as much anymore. Airbus assembling airplanes with different kinds of humanoid robots, robots. So the robotics is, and you've seen Boston Robotics, we've seen some videos on those. You can see how sophistication is growing, in terms of the way what robots can do. Here's an interesting video on the PDF in Brightspace in this course. You could play this. I wouldn't want to type all this, but you could pull up the PDF. I recommend you go get the PDF, pull up this YouTube, and watch this video on Amazon using robots in their warehouse. It's really pretty interesting. I think it might be, self-evident what the benefits are of automated labor. No healthcare expenses, no sick days. You work 24 hours, 7 days a week. It's easy, not as easy with physical robots, but with software robots, like robotic process automation for answering the phone or AI functionality. It's just a question of, logging on to some dashboard and adding your software robots, whether they're AI or robotic process automation. And they work 7 days a week, no unions, no smoking breaks, etc. And, benefits of human labor, unique problem solving. AI is catching up to us on that, right? Create new products. Again, I think you'll see AI doing some of this. Humans will be working with them to do that. Adaptability to a rapidly changing environment. We're going to see a lot of AI be able to do a lot of this. Question poorly made decisions. Hopefully AI will do some of that as well. So humans have some advantages. I think, we'll always have some advantage, at least for the next couple of generations, I think. At some point when we reach what's called the singularity, when AI becomes, super intelligent, right now, ChatGPT, Bing AI, and Bard, Google, this is what you call, AGI. general intelligence, artificial general intelligence. But when you get to artificial superintelligence, ASI, that's when you reach this singularity where people's intelligence are really not needed anymore. They've surpassed human intelligence. And an ASI, an artificial superintelligent organization or creature, or whatever you want to call it, functioning computer, could be an expert in everything. Could be an expert in medicine, chemistry, biology, mathematics, chess, you name it. This could be super intelligent. So we'll get to that point. You're not going to see that. We're not going to see that in my lifetime or your lifetime or even in your children's lifetime. But I think there'll be many benefits before we get to singularity. And humans will figure something else out. We'll adjust. I'm sure we will. There will certainly be, I would think, an age of plenty in terms of the automation creating, material goods for us. We have to just stay engaged in terms of what is, what's our meaning to life. If really we don't have to work as much or at all, maybe, several generations from now, work might be completely eliminated in hundreds of years. It'll probably take hundreds of years, 300, 400, 500 years. No one knows, but we're just guessing here. Now, this is a guess too that some years ago when this book was published, that by 2030, only 7 years away, almost 1 million workers may be taken out of the workforce. That could be the case. I'm sorry, 800 million, 1 billion. Globally, I would imagine. I think that's a little over ambitious. Robots will have IQs higher than 90% of the United States population. Yeah, that could be. That's possible. The year in which this happens, I don't think we're all guessing. No one really knows. Whether robots or AI, to the extent that they take human roles, human jobs away, we're not really sure. But someone has to support these machines, and it's going to take hundreds of years before they can really support themselves, these machines, and be self-sufficient. But at some point, they might be self-sufficient. But I think that we're talking about hundreds of years from now. Finally, the last slide on this deck, I wanted to I get some questions sometimes about, and I think we talked about VMs, virtual VMware. VMware is purchased by Dell. And VMs, as they're called shorthand, you have one piece of hardware with one operating system, and you add this hypervisor. The hypervisor is part of VM. It's part of the virtual VMware, part of its software, and it controls different operating systems. So the concept is here, on one hardware platform, you could have 3 different virtual machines. It could be Windows 8, Windows 10, Unix, Linux, as if they're 3 or 4 separate, or 5 or 6 separate machines, but they're physically one machine, but they're virtually separated by the hypervisor. And the hypervisor takes care of the resources in the hardware stack. It negotiates between the operating system and what's needed from the hardware in terms of memory and storage and printing, etc., and caching information, caching data. It's going to handle all that for you. And I've had some questions about, and this is really optional for those who want to learn more about, containers. I saw this nice video from IBM Cloud about containers, and sometimes people get confused between containers and VMware. This is more for the CPIS folks who are interested in containers. You might want to look at this video. Again, go to the PDF and copy and paste this URL, or just search for it on YouTube, and you'll find this 8-minute video on how the Docker engine is the most popular. There's Kubernetes, there's Docker. Those are the 2 companies that have the most common Docker systems. And a Docker system is really just a way to encapsulate all of your application software in one place in a container. So you can move that container to different systems easily and not worry about breaking things because you didn't move some attribute or some resource that your application was tied to, and now when you move that application, it doesn't work. So the idea of a container is to put all the resources needed for that application in this software container, so you can easily move it, scale it up, scale it down to different machines. And for those folks who are CPIS majors, you might want to watch that video. So this concludes our lecture for this module, and have a good day, and I'll see you in class for the next session.